How's it going? Today we're talking about magic. Magic is defined as the power of influencing the course of events by using mysterious or supernatural forces. Witchcraft and magic are concepts that exist all throughout history, spanning countless civilizations throughout the world. Humans have practiced some form of magic for at least 6,000 years, first being recorded in ancient Sumeria. Throughout the course of history, witchcraft has evolved, and cultures have developed unique forms of witchcraft or magic, akin to their beliefs and their environments. One of these cultures would be the Maori, the indigenous population of Aotearoa, or New Zealand. It's believed that the Maori arrived in Aotearoa in the 14th century via canoes and developed their culture and society in isolation until Europeans arrived in the 18th century. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the Maori oral tradition, a lot of the history that we have of the Maori sorcery is from the European ethnographers and writers such as Elsdon and James Cowan. These texts, though full of information about the practices of pre-European Maori, are filled with arrogant comments and racist beliefs that were held by these old bastards. I will preface this video by saying that historically, Aotearoa was and still is comprised of many different iwi or tribes with their own traditions. With that in mind, not all traditions or practices collected by these ethnographers are to be considered universal. If I make any mistakes or get anything wrong, please feel free to let me know in the comments and we'll discuss it. The mystical side of the Maori culture begins with the Tohunga, part of the culture that's often steeped in legend and myth. In Maoridom, the Tohunga are priestly experts in various fields. Tohunga can be broken down into classes of differing significance and importance, the highest of these classes being known as Tohunga Ahurewa. This was the class that people were usually understood to and simply referred to as Tohunga. And for the purpose of this video, when I say Tohunga, this is the class that I'm referring to. These learned people would be the medium between the gods and the world of men. They would fill many distinct roles in the tribe, such as the doctor, historian, military leader, and much more. With the Tohunga being so involved, there was a very strong relationship between the Tohunga and the rangatira, or chief.
The rangatira worked in collaboration with the Tohunga, and it was the rangatira who made the advice of the Tohunga put it into practice. So there was always this collaboration between the intellectual Tohunga of the hapu and the rangatira.
Tohunga were usually chosen at birth or at a very young age and were taught by their predecessor. The pupil would be taken into what's known as the whare wānanga, or sacred house of learning, and would be completely cut off from the outside world while they were being taught. Since the Maori had no written language, the Tohunga were instrumental in retaining the history and culture. Lengthy incantations, songs, genealogies, and secrets only known to the Tohunga were repeatedly drilled into the pupil's head until it was all taken to memory.
The marvelous Polynesian memory retained their cosmogony, genealogies going back 100 generations, the ancient migrations, the voyages of the famous canoes, and their systems of anthology, psychology, astronomy, psychomancy, eschatology, onerology, and physiolatry. In the sacred house, he graduated in the magic arts and sacred rites.
The Tohunga not only possessed knowledge in regard to the earthly plane, but were gifted in the mystical too. They often had the gift of foresight, divination of water, the ability to speak with the gods, and knew of many different spells and incantations. According to my dad, one of my grandfathers had the gift and had the ability to divinate water. These abilities were not necessarily commonplace in Maoridom, but they were understood and respected.
There are events that I've been through or witnessed that you'd never believe. For instance, back in 1985, here I was sitting by a little stream, watching my koroa build an altar, and in the dark, gathering leaves and manuka, putting them on this altar, and doing a karakia. And then, for no apparent reason, the altar burst into flames. I was already an academic then, and I wondered whether I actually saw that, or if there was a scientific rationale for it. Perhaps there was something in the makeup of the leaves that promoted combustion and made the leaves burst into flames. But the other part of my mind was saying, believe it, Temera. Just believe it.
The ritual incantations known by the Tohunga are called karakia. Karakia have been a major part of the Maori culture going as far back as the creation myth. They were often used to communicate with and ask the divine for something that they wanted. While certain karakia were known only by the Tohunga, many different karakia were known and used by the Maori population for pretty much every aspect of life. Historically, karakia were recited before big events such as meetings or funerals, but they were also recited in more mundane settings such as to welcome the dawn or during wood carvings. Traditionally, karakia are rapidly sung or chanted in a monotone voice, which kind of contrasts with the karakia's poetic nature and beautiful imagery. Throughout colonization, the majority of karakia were changed to better fit the Christian religion. The insertion of the Christian God and Jesus Christ changed the fundamental way that karakia were seen and began to be understood more as prayers. This change can still be felt today. I mean, fuck, I recite the Lord's Prayer when holding my manaya and I'm not even Christian. Like I mentioned earlier, many karakia were common knowledge, but there were a select few known only by the Tohunga. These were usually ceremonial in nature, being used for cleansings or funerals. But there were also a few karakia with intent to harm. While most of these karakia were not public knowledge, Elsdon best wrote a few of the karakia of the Nai Tuhoi that were designed to cause floods, leave the land infertile, or to make someone choke on the food that they're eating. He also wrote of karakia to awaken the bones of the dead to determine their locations, a spell to lessen the speed of someone pursuing you, and even a spell to sap the courage out of a warrior. But there is a darker side to the Tohunga's occult knowledge, something that they could wield with devastating results. Makutu, the power to kill or harm someone via incantation or curse. Tohunga would call upon the atua through karakia to enact his bidding. This could be done in many ways. The Tohunga could target a single person, bewitch an item or a certain location, or to even curse an entire family. This power, although known to many Tohunga, wasn't universally practiced or taught by all. In the most direct form of Makutu, the Tohunga would need a physical representation that had the essence of their victim within it. It was believed that people would leave a bit of themselves behind in objects, this being known as ohunga. Ohunga could be hair, leftover food, clothing, or even something they touched. This belief in ohunga and what could be done with it was a large part of the Maori culture, and they took a lot of precautions to protect themselves.
The old-time Maori had to carefully guard himself against magic rites, against infringing the laws of tapu, for a hair of his head, a shred of his clothing, a porting of the earth whereon he had left his footprint would, in the hands of an enemy, be sufficient to bring about his death.
Tapu is a bit of a complex concept, but simply put, it states something as holy or sacred, usually in regards to the atua, and that it should not be interacted with. If you engaged with something considered tapu, you would likely deal with a makutu, or simply be put to death. Most possessions of the higher class, and sometimes even the rangatira or tohunga themselves, were deemed tapu. This could be seen as an added level of protection for the higher class. Tapu could be felt not only in the higher class, but by all of Maoridom. Tapu affected how people behave towards each other and their environments. Simply put, you could consider tapu as more or less laws and makutu their consequences. The process of casting a makutu could be very involved. Hiroa records an account of a man, possibly a tohunga, of the Ngāti Porou tribe casting a makutu in 1867.
The ohunga, having been obtained, was subjected to the appropriate incantations. He was tried by a tribunal of his tribe, admitted that he had killed by Makutu the ohunga, whilst other incantations were being repeated, was wrapped up in a piece of reed grass or flax and taken to some secluded spot near a stream where a hole was dug. At this stage, the spiritual form of the victim, the wairua, would appear and be recognized, and the diagnosis was complete in cases of theft or crime. On the completion of the hole, according to this Ngāti Porou version, whilst the priest was repeating the words, a particular bronzed fly appeared and flew into the prepared hole. The priest, with a sudden movement, dashed a sod over the hole, imprisoning or slaying the fly, and at the same time repeating the final words of death. If the fly escaped, the victim would escape, but if it were killed, he was a dead man.
This, of course, is just one example and one way Makutu was carried out. Makutu was also utilised to prevent the mana of one person or an entire family from growing too strong. This was usually caused by either jealousy, revenge, or simply wanting control. If this was the case, and a Makutu was placed on a family, members of that family would become less fertile over time and children would die, usually leaving only a few survivors without any heirs. When this happened and the family line was at risk of going extinct, the family would be considered wharaengaro, or a lost house. Family legend states that this may have been what happened with one of my grandfathers, possibly explaining why kids keep dying in our family. Another prominent way to place a Makutu would be placing a Makutu on an object or place, which would usually lead to great pain or death to anyone that encountered it. This was generally used by the higher class to keep the rest of the population in line. They could be placed on farmlands to prevent people from stomping on crops, or placed on dangerous caves to stop people from entering and getting hurt, just to name a few examples. Though not as prominent today as it was in the past, the fear of tapu and Makutu can definitely still be felt today. My father told me that when he was growing up, he refused to go to certain places in fear of the consequences of breaking tapu. With the power to place Makutu, the Tohunga also had the ability to lift Makutu as well. Alongside Makutu, there was also a variety of karakia and rites that were used to negate or redirect the effects of Makutu. Author James Cowan documented a successful Makutu lifting that occurred with the Ngāti Ruanui near the town of Hawera in 1879. According to Cowan, one of the rangatira's children fell ill and was evaluated by a local Tohunga. The Tohunga determined that the boy had been bewitched by Makutu. The Tohunga met the family at a nearby river for the ceremony the next morning. After repeating an incantation, the Tohunga pulled out 3 shoots of toto or curry grass, naming each of them as follows: 1 for the tribe, 1 for the sick one, and 1 for the evil man, and then placed them in the ground upright. He revealed that the man who cursed the boy was a close relative and asked the family what they'd like done. The father instructed the Tohunga to let the perpetrator die. Right as the father said this, the family dog ran and pulled the 3rd shoot of toto out of the ground. The Tohunga then recited an opening karakia, appealing to the atua. He then placed his hands on the 2 remaining toto shoots, continuing his karakia, and placed them in a tree next to the river, claiming them now to be tapu. Finally, the Tohunga recited a karakia to invoke death and redirect the Makutu that was placed on the boy back at the caster. Cowan concluded the story with this:
The boy began to recover fast, and in a few days was well. Faith had worked wonders. As for the enemy who had, according to Hupini, wrought the evil deed, the curse fell quickly. Hupini had told Rupe his name. It was that of a relative of his, who lived at Parihaka, and who had some reputation as a tohunga and a caster of spells. In a week, news came to Parihaka that this man had died suddenly, cause unknown. In the minds of Rupe and his household, and also in that of the Tohunga, there was no doubt whatsoever as to the cause of death.
Unfortunately, much like the rest of the world, Aotearoa was also afflicted with the curse of colonialism. In regards to the Tohunga, the arrival of the Europeans introduced new illnesses that the Tohunga had no weapons against. With new diseases spreading alongside Christianity, many Maori lost their faith in their Tohunga, which would lead to many whare wānanga closing and the decline of the Tohunga knowledge alongside it. This, among other actions, would ultimately lead to the majority of the Maori culture to become lost for some time. While the prominence of the Tohunga was in decline, conmen would take this as an opportunity to profit off the people, becoming what was known as second-class Tohunga. These cunts would prey on the people, travelling from tribe to tribe and claiming to have cures and potions and whatnot, but without any of the proper knowledge or training that the true Tohunga possessed. In response to the spreading, self-appointing Tohunga, the government drew up the Tohunga Suppression Act of 1907.
Every person who gathers Maoris around him by practicing on their superstition or credulity, or who misleads or attempts to mislead any Maori by professing or pretending to possess supernatural powers in the treatment or cure of any disease, or in the foretelling of future events, or otherwise, is liable on summary conviction before a magistrate to a fine not exceeding £25 or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 6 months.
Some people claim that this act was only to stop the fake Tohunga and not against the actual Tohunga, but nowhere in the act does it specify that actual Tohunga could continue their practices. The act itself seems to have been to promote European medicine and could be seen as an attempt to drive the Maori away from their heritage and separate them from their culture. Even if it wasn't directly targeted at the true Tohunga, it still had a major effect on them, and combined with the decrease in demand, many fled underground and refused to teach the next generation of Tohunga. The Tohunga Suppression Act stayed around for 55 years, officially being repealed in 1962 with the introduction of the Maori Community Development Act. During this time, the majority of Tohunga lost their way of life. Belief in the utilisation of Maori medicine dwindled over this time, almost becoming extinct. With the population of Maori decreasing and the acceptance of the European culture and religion growing, Maori culture as a whole was remarkably close to being lost. Fortunately, a renaissance began. Starting in the 1970s, pockets of the Maori population told the government to get fucked and fought for greater representation within the Pākehā or European systems. The Maori language, for example, which was hardly used at the time, was finally being taught in schools. The Waitangi Tribunal was set up to investigate breaches in the Waitangi Treaty. For a bit of context, the Waitangi Treaty was an agreement between British colonialists and the Rangatira in 1840. Many of the rights guaranteed to the Maori were completely ignored, and it's still a bit of a hot topic today. But this tribunal was thought to be the beginnings of the current bicultural relationship between the Maori and the Pākehā systems. The 1980s had the most prominent display of Maori culture on the world stage, this being Te Maori, a 3-year-long exhibition that displayed many distinct aspects of the Maori culture internationally for the first time. The exhibition kicked off in New York at the Met and spent time at 3 other museums across the United States, with the final leg occurring across Aotearoa. This exhibition was instrumental in the wider world finally seeing firsthand what the Maori culture was like. As for the modern day Tohunga, the future seems bright. From what I can tell, efforts for the revitalisation of the Tohunga are being led by Sir Hirini Moko Mead and Sir Po Tamara. The 1980s brought the first official meeting of the Tohunga in modern times. This meeting was brought together by Sir Mead as to be a part of the Te Maori exhibition.
We found that many of the Tohunga that took part in the openings of Te Maori exhibition were highly colonised. There were great arguments and debates when they reached America as to why we should be using ancient karakia when those were pagan practices, and why aren't we using Christian rituals to open the exhibition.
From that point on, the Tohunga took on a similar but more subdued role in their communities. More than anything at this point, the Tohungas are the preservers of knowledge, and keeping that knowledge alive is their most important mission. 3 officially recognised wananga, schools with a focus on Maori culture, have been opened, with a few satellite schools for each of them. Since that first meeting in the 80s with the Tohunga, there's been a great focus on relearning the teachings of the past without the influence of colonisation and gaining knowledge from elsewhere. The Tohunga of the past were limited with the knowledge that they had available to them on Aotearoa, but now the modern Tohunga can draw inspiration and knowledge from all over the globe and create an understanding beyond colonisation. Even though the role of Tohunga is being preserved as best as it can, due to the lasting effects of colonialism, we have lost a lot of knowledge to time.
There is Tohunga knowledge beyond us. Unfortunately, many Tohunga have died without passing on their knowledge. But if it is not shared, it becomes dead knowledge. So I ascribe to the view that I should leave behind my experiences as a Tohunga for others to look at, for others to mock, to marvel at, for others to wonder about. I will leave that in writing.
As of posting this, the most recent meeting of the Tohunga occurred in November of 2022. This meeting was once again led by Sir Mead and Tamara, and brought together the last 12 traditionally taught Tohunga, as well as their students. This was a 3-day symposium held to share ideas and to create a picture of what the future of Tohunga could be, and what their role in their communities would be moving forward.
We are also thrilled to see people who were once students that we taught stepping out of the shadows and coming back years later to tell us what they have achieved and sharing newfound knowledge. They are leading their iwi in initiatives like innovative methods of teaching te reo, presiding over wananga and schools of learning for different age groups of their communities, encouraging the learning of iwi and hapu histories and traditions, and spotlighting a way forward in a world full of challenges that will test the very legitimacy of their Māori world.
Janet Moses.
Nā toko rima mo te kohuruia Janet Moses I te tau 2017.
Janet Moses died during a Makutu.
Killing a young mum.
Killing Janet Moses.
During an exorcism.
Exorcism
ceremony.
This has been a very controversial case.
Torture and death are just not acceptable.
Does it?
Got a lot of humbug. This is voodoo.
Hyperarousal dissociation.
Sorcery case.
A book by its cover.
Witchcraft. The media jumps on
Family
it.
members desperate to hide the faces of the accused.
Fucking take photos there. We're in enough fucking tragedy as it is, okay?
On the 12th of October 2007, a woman was killed during an unsanctioned Makutu lifting. Janet Moses, the 22-year-old mother of two, was believed to have been the victim of Makutu. In the weeks before the lifting, Janet had been dealing with the death of her grandmother and had recently split with her boyfriend and father of her children. According to her family and friends, she was becoming very withdrawn and acting erratically. With Janet's behaviour becoming more of a concern, the family sought advice from a local elder. After examining her, the elder told the family that she was the victim of a Makutu. He said that the source of the Makutu was a lion statue, and that it should be returned immediately. This lion statue was stolen by members of the family from a local hotel several weeks before. Initially it was stolen due to the family having strong ties to images of lions and it being a symbol of the family itself. After returning the lion, the elder blessed her, and she seemed to be getting better, so he left, believing the rest should sort itself out. Unfortunately, it didn't. Things only got worse from that point on. Janet continued to display troubling behaviour, and the family grew more concerned. At that point, the family thought that the only way to save Janet was to perform a Makutu lifting and to remove the demon from inside her. And that same night, it began. The Makutu lifting started with the family members comforting Janet, reciting karakia and repeating the phrase, "Go with peace and love," to encourage the demon to leave. This continued for hours, leading into the next day. A few members of Janet's paternal side suggested getting a Tohunga involved, but the family declined. Gerald Moses, Janet's father, tried multiple times to have his daughter leave with him, but to no avail. At one point, Janet's boyfriend stopped by but was turned away by the family. After a couple of days of this long ceremony, things got out of control. The family completely shut themselves off from the outside world. Many family members hadn't slept in days and things weren't going well. Dozens of people trapped in a small house with someone they believe is possessed. It's not going to end well any way you play it. They began to hold Janet down and pour water over her, down her throat and in her eyes, in an attempt to rid her of the demon. They forced her to throw up and to expel the demon that way. They did anything and everything they could think of to try to help Janet. Towels filled with vomit lined the laundry, resulting in the only bathroom becoming banned from use. This left the family with no toilet and no way to relieve themselves. Neighbours could hear the family chanting and stomping at all hours for days on end. In the heat of the moment, when Janet resisted and begged for them to stop, the family understood it to be the demon inside of her and continued anyway. The hysteria inside the house grew, and they believed that the demon could be spread via eye contact to other family members. This led to the family believing it had spread to an unnamed 14-year-old girl. Both Janet and the girl were repeatedly drenched with so much water that it flooded the house and a hole had to be drilled into the floor to prevent further flooding. After a full night of this torture, at 8 AM, Janet Moses drowned and passed away. The intense fear and hysteria that the family felt led them to not even realise that Janet had gone initially, and they'd continue to try to defeat the demon even after she'd died. Once they realised she had passed, their attention turned to the aforementioned 14-year-old. 9 hours after the death of Janet Moses, the police were called. 9 of the family members were charged with manslaughter. This tragedy and the following trial became massive news, not only on a local level, but on an international one, bringing Makutu into the limelight for the first time. The trial went on for 29 days, with over 100 witnesses called to stand. During the trial, many experts in both Maori culture and psychiatric health were called upon. According to many Tohunga, the way that the family executed the Makutu lifting had never been heard of before. Even Sir Po Tamara, the Tohunga we met earlier, spoke on the matter, saying that the family didn't seek good advice and they took it upon themselves without having any knowledge about those kinds of processes. This was admitted by the family, stating that the Makutu lifting was highly improvised and they had no real training or knowledge on the matter. In June of 2009, almost 2 years after the death, 5 family members were found guilty of the death of Janet Moses.
Well, to breaking news now, and the jury in the Janet Moses exorcism trial in Wellington has just returned with a verdict. Simon.
It's been a long wait for that jury to come back with their verdict. A lot of people at court wanting to hear that verdict. Here's what happened.
Guilty, 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 not guilty, not guilty, not guilty.
These 5 defendants found guilty of manslaughter after a 5-week trial and almost 2 days of deliberation. 3 other family members were acquitted and walked free from court. The 2 family leaders, John Rawiri and Glenys Wright, received community detention, allowing them to live at home under a curfew. They and their co-offenders, all aunts of Janet Moses, also sentenced to community service, supervision, and to undertake cultural education programs.
There was a documentary released covering this case, if you want to watch it. The documentary seems to be where most people get their information on this case, but it definitely feels like the documentary is more cinematic and exaggerated than real life, and the director stated as much, saying,
"The biggest challenge was firstly getting people to talk. The family didn't want to appear on camera, so I had to look for outsiders who had insight and then find ways to tell the story that felt authentic and cinematic. As soon as you pick up the camera, you become subjective. And in this case, I was writing dramatizations as well. So yes, I'm trying my best to be objective, but who am I kidding? It's subjective. Every film is, every documentary is."
The death of Janet Moses was a tragedy, plain and simple. In my opinion, Janet was probably experiencing mental health issues due to everything that was going on in her life. Whether or not she was the victim of a Makutu, we'll never know. There's no denying that the family loved Janet and did everything that they saw fit to do in attempts to help her, but the fear and hysteria got to them. From the testimonies, it was revealed that the family, though Maori, weren't fully connected with their culture or tradition. They did seek out advice from one elder, but shouldn't have stopped there. A Tohunga, medical doctor, or any other expert should have been contacted. That being said, I don't really think that this was entirely the family's fault. After hundreds of years of colonization, it's not a surprise that many people are out of touch with their traditions. I mean, colonial governments have tried their fucking best to wipe out indigenous populations all over the world. It seems like most of the family's influence when it comes to the Makutu lifting came directly from Christian exorcisms and the Christian faith in general. If you noticed, I never mentioned demons being involved in Makutu before I mentioned Janet Moses. This wasn't Makutu lifting as it's known in Maoridom. It was way more akin to an exorcism. If anything, this shows just how important it is to at least have a general understanding of one's culture and community, and just how serious mental health is and how serious it should be taken. The family may have had the best intentions, but extreme fear of the unknown and detachment from tradition is what killed Janet Moses in the end. Even though the practitioners of Makutu were often despised and condemned, Makutu was just another part of life for the early Maori. Though mystified today, mostly due to Eurocentric ethnographers and detachment from culture, Makutu was well understood by most of the Maori population and served as a general behaviour guideline. It was definitely used for nefarious purposes at times, but was also there to show how people should interact with each other and their environment. It It was just an accepted part of the culture. In the words of Saji Sharma, culture is a beautiful thing that imperialism and colonialism have stained all too often. The Maori culture is full of beauty and life, and what I've covered in this video is just one small aspect that I don't see talked about all that much. Due to the nature of colonialism, a lot of the culture was at risk of going extinct, but luckily the recent resurgence of indigenous pride is fixing that. Life is all about experiencing new things and gaining new knowledge. Hopefully this video may have sparked just a little bit of curiosity in the unknown. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you'd like, feel free to leave a like or subscribe, and if you feel that I may have missed something or want to correct me on anything, please feel free to leave a comment and we'll talk about it. Thank you again, and I'll catch you later. Have a good one.